All right, guys, how many of you guys like to eat food? Me too. So this one hits kind of close to home, right? The people waging war on our farmers, it's like personal. I like to eat food. I imagine you guys do too. And so, yeah, waging war on farmers is a very bad idea. But it's happening, right? And we can survive without journalists, we can survive without politicians, we can survive without bureaucrats, we can survive without a lot of people, but we can't survive without the people who make our food. So this is really important. And unfortunately, we have evildoers at the highest levels who are trying to take out our farmers, take out our ranchers, and take total control of the food supply. Now, a lot of it is being done under the guise of the climate hoax, which Willie Soon spoke about. I spoke about that just a couple days ago. And so the climate hoax is important, but listen to John Kerry address the problem of agriculture.
They have no clue that agriculture contributes about 33% of all the emissions of the world, depending a little bit on how you count it, but it's anywhere from 26 to 33. And
that's really quiet, isn't it? Yes. Yeah. Let me see if I can turn that up. Put the speaker to the mic. Oh, good idea. Thank you. Smart students. That's why we pay you guys the big bucks. All right. Let's start again. All right. So here's John Kerry. I actually ran into John Kerry in Egypt. I was at the UN Climate Summit there. That was in 2022. And that was still when everybody was virtue signaling with the mask. So he's walking around with this big squad of goons and he's got a mask on. So, Mr. Kerry. Woo! And he couldn't really talk to me with the mask. And then once he realized what I was going to ask, he's like, zoop. But here he is.
have no clue that agriculture contributes about 33% of all the emissions of the world, depending a little bit on how you count it, but it's anywhere from 26 to 33. And we can't get to net zero. We don't get this job done unless agriculture is front and center as part of the solution.
Dun, dun, dun. Agriculture contributes 30% of global emissions. I hope you're scared. No mention of the fact that it also contributes 100% of our food, which kind of important, right? So when he talks about net zero, how many of you guys know what he means with net zero? Can anybody explain to us what net zero means?
Zero emissions.
All right, Martha, go ahead.
They want zero carbon emissions.
Okay, yep, they want to get down to net zero carbon emissions, which there's only a few ways you could do that. That means there is no increase in atmospheric levels of CO2 contributed by human beings. And of course, we exhale about 2 pounds of CO2 every single day that we live just by breathing. And so that becomes a very, very difficult thing to do. When they talk about net zero, we need to understand they mean completely undermining all human activity. Agriculture, as you just heard, shipping, transportation. But if you really get serious, you got to take it, if you really want to take it down to zero, well, your only option is to either get rid of human beings or find ways to get it out of the atmosphere. And I believe they're trying to engineer a food crisis. And I believe I will show you today more than enough evidence to lead you to that same conclusion as well. And every once in a while, one of our politicians says, did you have a question, Charmaine?
I just want to make a comment about getting rid of the carbon dioxide that we breathe out, the exhale. I thought the trees took care of that.
That's right. The trees do take care of that.
How God created everything to work in tandem.
Exactly.
They give out carbon dioxide, they take it.
Yep. So we exhale CO2, and they used to teach this in school. I don't know if they do anymore, but humans exhale CO2, and then plants use the CO2 through a process called photosynthesis to be able to grow, and then they release oxygen, which then we breathe in, and it's a nice little cycle that God designed. But these totalitarians say, no, CO2 is bad. We have to control it. Yes, sir?
If you notice, you see what he's wearing, pretty much everything there was took some amount of carbon to make.
Oh, absolutely, yep. Everything he's wearing, yep. Absolutely everything around us requires CO2 emissions. But what he'll say is, oh, don't worry. I bought carbon credits from my homeboy Al Gore, and so aren't I virtuous, right? I used your tax money to give money to Al Gore so he could uproot a village in Central America or Africa, and we could plant trees there, and presto, now there's less carbon emissions. So it's a scam of monumental proportions. Now, every once in a while, one of these guys will say the quiet part out loud. Here is Beijing Biden making a stunning admission.
With regard to food shortages, yes, we did talk about food shortages, and it's going to be real.
It's going to be real. okay? The food shortages that are coming are gonna be real. And I agree with him. They are engineering food shortages as we speak. Now the UN had an interesting little website that they took down once people started talking about it. It was on the benefits of world hunger. I kid you not, right? You can find this in the archive. And they quoted a guy called George Kent. He says, hunger has great positive value to many people. Indeed, it's fundamental to the working of the world's economy. Hungry people are the most productive people. Okay, right? So we're going to make you hungry and then you'll work harder. But they are already planning for a famine, folks. And what I'm going to show you is the UN is actually leading this campaign against our food producers. But at the same time, they're saying, if you give us more power and more money, we'll protect you from the food crisis that we ourselves are engineering. Listen.
The state of food security and nutrition in the world report reveals the last 2 years have already seen a doubling of the number of people who are severely food insecure. We face a real risk of multiple famines this year. And next year could be even worse. But we can avoid this catastrophe if we act now. And as our meeting team reminds us, if we act together to craft bold and coordinated policy responses.
You ever watch those late night sales flim-flam men on TV? If you act now, not only will we send you the one, we'll give you 2 free. Right? That's what it sounds like. So they're engineering multiple global famines. But if we act now with coordinated policy solutions, which means we'll let the UN do the deciding, then maybe we could possibly protect you from the crisis that we are concocting for you as we speak. So my first clue that they were up to this was actually almost 14 years ago. So I had a special interest in South Africa. I used to live in South Africa. And I knew some farmers in South Africa. And these were salt-of-the-earth kind of people, Christian people. The most productive, no offense to American farmers, but the most productive farmers anywhere on the planet. The average Afrikaner farmer feeds more people than any other farmer on the face of the earth. And yet, I'm paying attention to the news, and you've got the president of the country singing, "Bring me my machine gun. We're going to shoot all the farmers." What? What kind of crazy talk is that? Right? So the Boer actually means farmer. It's the Afrikaans and the Dutch word for farmer. The Boers are the most productive farmers in the world, and they are being targeted for extermination right now by the government, by Marxist mobs, by racist lunatics. And the more I dug into this, the more I realized it was all based on lies. I mean, you can pick up the New York Slimes and they'll say, oh, those evil Afrikaner farmers own most of the land in South Africa. Total baloney. They own less than 20% of the land in South Africa. The government owns far more than they do. Why lie? Why not just tell the truth? Well, because there's an agenda here, right? And then you look at the land that they actually own, that they farm on. This is desert land for the most part. Everything west of the Fish River in South Africa is very, very dry. It's very hard to have agriculture there. And yet these guys have created some of the most productive farms in the world. And then in 2012, actually the president of the country, this was Jacob Zuma, a polygamist. He got in trouble for rape one time. He said, I couldn't help it, her conga was so short, sorry. And he's on stage in front of his soldiers singing, bring me my machine gun, we're going to shoot all the farmers. Listen.
Maza! Awe tu! Ozan sodelani inenwini leyo. Sizobatubula ngembamba bazobaleka tu.
The guy gesticulating, totally fake sign language they figured out later. Absolutely true. Alright, so we're going to shoot the farmers. Cabinet's going to shoot the farmers with me. Bring me my machine gun. We're going to shoot the farmers. So, I mean, it's a catchy tune, right? But, I mean, okay, these people are not stupid, right? Not all that long ago, they tried this just north of the border in a place called Zimbabwe. They shot the farmers, okay? And they went from being the agricultural breadbasket of Africa to being a total basket case. They literally were starving. They had to beg the United States and the United Abominations to send them food so that they wouldn't all starve to death. So it's not like they're like, what would happen if we shot all the farmers? Like, all you had to do was look at north of the border, and when you shoot all the farmers, very bad things happen. Okay? Now here's another guy. This is also 2012. His name is Julius Malema. And I first started reporting on this in 2012. It was a few years after I had left South Africa. I knew things were bad, but I didn't know how bad they were when I was down there. And so now recently this has come out. I don't know if you guys saw Donald Trump had the President Cyril Ramaphosa in the Oval Office and gave him a nice spanking. He kind of put the video up and they all got to see that Trump wasn't just making this stuff up. So here's another video. This was 2012. When this was happening, he was the head of the ANC Youth League. If you're familiar with the ANC, it's basically a front for the Communist Party. It rules South Africa in an alliance with the Communist Party and a big labor union called COSATU. And here he is on stage singing, "We're gonna shoot the farmers." Shoot the farmer. Brr, pa. What could go wrong, right? Now, just imagine for a moment. Imagine any other country where a very large majority in power, ruling from the highest levels, including the presidency and the ruling political party, were singing about massacring and exterminating an embattled minority group. Just imagine that in any other country, in any other context, with any other setup. Doesn't matter if they're purple, green, yellow, red, doesn't matter. In any country, if you have the president of the country singing, "Bring me my machine gun, we're going to shoot members of a minority group," everybody in the world would say, "Wait a minute, that sounds kind of fishy. Are you sure you want to be doing that?" And yet when it happens in South Africa, oh, it's just a struggle song. What? Rev, am I lying? No. And so this was happening in South Africa. Everybody in the world, in any other context, would have said, "Wait a minute, that's really weird." But in South Africa, nobody wanted to talk about it. Okay, so I wrote an article in the New American. It was a cover story. It was called "Genocide and Communism Threaten South Africa." There's a lot that we have been lied to about South Africa. And as I started digging into this, I'll tell you why I really started digging into it in a moment. But already, out of 40,000 commercial Afrikaner farmers in South Africa, 10,000 of them have already been slaughtered on their own farms. So well over 10%. You know, the Romans used to have something called decimated, where they would slaughter 10%. So South African Afrikaner farmers have already been decimated and worse. Okay. Now, I first, because I knew some of this was happening, but it was one of those things that you just couldn't talk about. But then Gregory Stanton, he's the world's top expert on genocide, founded a group called Genocide Watch. He went down there in 2012, and a bunch of my South African friends said, "Alex, why won't you talk about this? Like, look, even Gregory Stanton came down, and he was well known as an anti-apartheid activist, so nobody could say, like, oh, you're an apartheid apologist." He went down there, and he did an investigation, a fact-finding mission, and he had developed a genocide scale. He had studied genocides all over the world, what had just recently happened in Rwanda and all that. He had looked at genocides all over the world, and from his studies, he came up with a genocide scale that had 8 stages. Stage 8 was after the fact, where you deny that you committed a genocide. Oh, we didn't do it. There was nothing, we didn't do anything wrong here. Stage 7 is the actual extermination process, where people are being systematically eliminated. Stage 6 is the planning and preparation phase. And he went down to South Africa and he said, South Africa is at stage 6. We have direct evidence that the government is inciting genocide against an identifiable group of people, in this case, Afrikaner Boers or farmers. And I just showed you the proof. I mean, it's not like it was hiding. It was like literally broadcast on national TV. So I thought, okay, this is my cue. I've got to write something about it. He says, direct evidence of South African government incitement to genocide. He did a 45-minute presentation after his fact-finding mission. I just want to show you a little clip.
South Africa from stage 5 to stage 6, when Julius Malema began to go around singing the Shoot the Boer song again. It became clear to us that the Youth League was in fact this kind of an organization. It was planning this kind of genocidal massacre and also forced displacement of whites from South Africa. And so we raised it to 6. When Julius Malema was then, thanks to the TAU and others, tried for hate speech and was convicted and was in fact enjoined by the judge from ever singing that song again, we said, oh, you know, there was a great sense of relief from some of us that maybe South Africa was pulling back. But then the president himself started singing this song. Well, this really worries us now. And one thing that I have learned on this trip is just how strong the Communist Party still is in the African National Congress, COSATU, the Youth League, and other parts of this system.
Wow. So when he said that, I thought, all right, you know what? Nobody can argue about this anymore. This is a fact. There are crazy genocidal communists who are trying to exterminate a Christian people who are especially well known for feeding the world with their very productive farms. That's not good. So we did a big article about it. And that was my first piece of the puzzle. I still hadn't connected it to internationally what was going on. But then the next year, I used to live in Brazil as well. I started getting contacted by friends in Brazil. Alex, they're wiping out whole villages. They're taking whole towns off the map. They're forcing these poor little farmers to dismantle their poor little houses and stick them in the back of trucks, and then they have to go live under a bridge. What? So it's happening in South Africa, and it's happening in Brazil. Here's the article I wrote in January of 2013. Amid federal land grab in Brazil, whole towns evicted at gunpoint. And the more I dug into this, the more alarming it was. Now, it was a slightly different pretext than in South Africa. But essentially, it was the same objective. Get the farmers off of their land. And these, again, are some of the most productive farmers in the world. They run huge numbers of cattle, super productive farmers. And there's an agency of the Brazilian government called FUNAI. It's the Indian agency. And under the guise of giving this land back to Indians who supposedly might have walked through there several hundred years ago before Portuguese arrived, they said, we have to clear out all of these farms. Hundreds of thousands of hectares of the most productive agricultural land in the world was being taken out of production to give, allegedly, back to the Xavante Indians. And by the time this was all said and done, we're talking millions of hectares of the most rich and fertile agricultural land in the world. Here's a little news report from there. A lot of it's in Portuguese. I'll translate some of it as it goes. But just so you can kind of see what this looks like when the government comes in and is literally removing agricultural towns off the face of the earth.
Dentro do distrito de Estrela do Araguaia, as cenas mais comuns são essas. Polícias nas ruas,
These are common
oficial de justiça
scenes,
acompanhado da
the
polícia,
police and
visitando
military,
residência e comércio, caminhões carregados com mudanças,
trucks full of
casas
moving
e comércios
materials,
sendo desmanchados,
houses and businesses
e
being dismantled,
mas muita revolta.
and a lot of anger and revolt.
Pois eu fiz um ano novo.
I can't believe it.
Situação aqui, ó.
They're making me take down my own house.
O que a justiça nossa? Acabou com tudo.
What's going to happen to us? Where are we going to go?
Nesse mundo. Tem que desmanchar, tem que vazar, né?
Tem de falar que é a injustiça do Brasil.
Yeah, this is justice in Brazil, it says. So it was a tragedy. I mean, little kids crying as they're carrying their teddy bears out of their little ramshackle houses. I mean, it was heartbreaking. The Brazilian government said, hey, we have to do this to comply with the United Abominations. They have what they call the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and in Article 26 it says indigenous peoples have the right to the lands, territories, and resources which they have traditionally owned, occupied, or otherwise used or acquired. And when you actually extrapolate out from that, the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous People came to America. He said virtually the entire landmass of the United States of America, you need to hand that back to the Indians, including, by the way, Mount Rushmore. Yes, you need to give that back to them. So as I was looking at this, and the Brazilian government's by the way, the Brazilian government was totally run by Marxists, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, an actual communist revolutionary who started the Foro de Sao Paulo with Fidel Castro, another communist mass murdering revolutionary. They said, we're giving this land back to the Xavante Indians. And so I called the leadership of the Xavante Indians. Said, hey guys, the government says they're giving you all this land back. What do you think? Are you happy to have all this land? The chief of the tribe said, that's not our land. That has never been our land. He said to me, we are Indians of the Floresta. We're Indians of the jungle. We are not Indians of the Cerrado, which is kind of the savanna area where this agricultural stuff was taking place. So he said, don't blame us. They are not giving that to us. That is not our land. We never asked for that. So this is the government's project. We have nothing to do with it. Oh, that's pretty interesting. So now I've got South Africa. We've got Brazil. And then Also, later in 2013, this is summer of 2013, I found out that in China, they don't even need an excuse, right? It's just do what we say or we'll kill you. So I found out the government of China was, again, dismantling entire agricultural villages. Now, they didn't have a race card to play there, right? They're all Mandarin Han Chinese, right? So they couldn't play a race card there, nothing about Indians or land injustice or whatever. It was just, hey, we need the land. We're going to build more productive, big corporate government-controlled farms, and you're in the way. So if you don't move, we'll kill you. And by the way, we built you a nice little box in the city. We'll call it an apartment, and yeah, enjoy your new life. So I started digging into this, and it was crazy. Their plan, they called it the National New Type Urbanization Plan, and under the plan, this is all public, right? These are all public-facing documents. They said that they were going to move 250 million rural people out of rural areas into these totalitarian, tightly controlled cities by 2026, and they are well on their way. In fact, when I put this presentation together last year, they had already wiped almost 1 million villages, not villagers, villages, off the face of the earth. Same exact thing. They go in with guns and they say, look, take down your house, take down your village, go to the city. We've got a little apartment for you. If you don't agree, well, we can do this the hard way. Okay. So we got South Africa, Marxists. We've got Brazil, Marxists. We've got China, Marxists, all doing the same thing. Under a different pretext, yes, but all doing the same thing. And then Sri Lanka. The government decided to ban fertilizer and modern agricultural technology and insecticides and pesticides. They said, we have to do this to comply with the UN's agreements. And guess what happened? The entire agricultural system collapsed. They went from being net food exporters to starving. Right? And since they weren't exporting any food, they didn't have money to buy fuel or medicine. So what happened? Revolution. People invaded the presidential palace. People invaded the prime minister's residence. They brought down the government. And they still all went hungry. Okay? And then it started hitting even closer to home. Some of you might have heard Holland, where the ancestors of the Boers came from. Again, some of the most productive farmers in the world. Holland exports more agricultural produce by value than any country in the world other than the United States, even though it's a tiny, tiny little country. Why? Because these are incredibly productive farmers. For hundreds of years, they've mastered the art of mass producing food on tiny little pieces of land in very sustainable ways. And so the government said, hey, global warming, nitrogen, UN and EU agreements, you can't be farming anymore. And they publicly announced, we're going to expropriate at least 1/3 of all the farms in this country. And we're going to make it almost impossible to do farming if you want to choose to continue. So we've got South Africa, Brazil, China, Sri Lanka, Holland. Right, here the Member of Parliament Gideon van Meijeren said the expropriation plans of the cabinet are a downright declaration of war on the agricultural sector under false pretenses. Farmers are being robbed of their land, centuries-old farms are being demolished, farmers' families are being totally destroyed. There was a great documentary that I helped produce by the Epoch Times. I would encourage you to watch it. It's called No Farmers, No Food. And they actually go into really great depth on this. They interview some of these farmers who the government is destroying. And, they didn't have the race card to play there. It wasn't officially Marxists. It was just, hey, global warming. Sorry, we have to destroy your farm. And throughout all of this, nobody is asking, well, wait a minute. If you destroy all the farms, who's going to feed us? Right? Like, we kind of need food if we're going to continue to exist. Then you had the UK, right? They announced just a couple years ago they were going to impose these taxes, and they said the goal of the taxes was to eventually get this land out of agricultural production and then cover it with trees or do some goofy sustainable project that was going to take it out of agricultural production. And then you get to the United States, right? And they have different excuses here too. You all probably remember the Bundy Ranch. Right? I think in that case, it all started with a gopher tortoise of some sort. And they claim the gopher tortoises are endangered. I'm building a farm right now. I've got at least 5 or 10 gopher tortoises on 10 acres. So don't tell me that these gopher tortoises are endangered. It's ridiculous. And they want like $25,000 to move each one if you're going to build something there. It's ridiculous. So they told these Bundy ranchers, this family settled on this land in the 1800s. Okay? Out of 52 ranches in this southeast Nevada region, this was the last ranch standing. Every one of the other ranches had been shut down, sold off, and they called it quits because of endless pressure by the government. The only one left standing was the Bundy Ranch. And you probably never would have heard about the Bundy Ranch, except that the Bundys called their friends and said, we're not moving, we're not leaving, you're not taking our cows, and if you want to push it, we'll be here and we'll be armed. That's why you heard about the Bundy situation. How many of you guys have heard of the Bundy situation? Okay. Turned into a big thing. I mean, it was scary. I actually thought people were going to get shot. There was like those crazy photos of federal agents aiming guns at protesters, and I mean, it was really intense. They ended up arresting a bunch of people. The ones who did go to trial all got set free because the government was so out of control during all this. But they came up with phony pretexts. First it was the gopher tortoises, and then they had these different excuses. Now they've got all kinds of different excuses across the United States as to why they're destroying our farms. They've got the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act. I mean, just pick an excuse out of a hat, and that's good enough if it'll help us destroy the farms. So we've got all these, and by the way, this is just the tip of the iceberg. All over the world, they're doing the same thing. They're targeting farmers. They have different excuses, whatever will best suit the local context, whatever will be least likely to raise the alarm among the people being targeted. Climate change, global warming, race issues, Indian issues, efficiency, productivity, nitrogen. They really don't care. The point is the same. In every one of these countries, farmers and ranchers, the people who produce our food, are being targeted for elimination. To me, that's kind of scary. Because again, I like to eat. And I like my children to have food. Okay? And the tyrants know very well what happens when the food dries up. Anybody ever heard of the Holodomor? Very few. The Holodomor. Joseph Stalin decided he didn't much like the Ukrainians, so he sent his stormtroopers to go seize all of their grain, knowing full well what that would do. And he starved somewhere between 7 to 10 million people to death. I've read several books about it. It's some of the most horrifying stuff you can possibly imagine. I haven't been sharing graphic details because I know we got young people in the room. So I won't explain the details of the horrors that we saw in Ukraine. This was back in the 1930s. And I didn't explain the horrors that we're seeing in the massacres of these farmers in South Africa. But we're seeing some of the most brutal torture, some of the most grotesque things that a person could imagine, targeting babies, targeting the elderly. Oftentimes they'll leave a Bible on the bodies of these people because they know they're Christian. They'll leave a warning, hey, we're coming for the rest of you when we get back. It's scary, scary stuff. We're dealing with demonic forces from the pit of hell. But there is a kind of a global framework that informs a lot of this. And I mentioned it the other day. Actually, one of the students asked me about the 2030 agenda. So we're going to run out of time way before I get anywhere close to the end of this presentation. But the 2030 agenda, as the head of the UN General Assembly put it when it was approved in 2015, is the master plan for humanity. Okay? The global declaration of interdependence for the global government. And if you read it, it's 17, they call them Sustainable Development Goals. They tell you what they're doing, right? We're going to redistribute your wealth. We're going to have the government take control of production and consumption, which very much includes agriculture. And then you dig into the 17 goals, right? There's at least half a dozen that deal directly with getting farmers and ranchers and fishermen out of the industries that they're in under the guise of sustainability. And again, nobody's asking the obvious question, well, who's going to feed us? Right? And we'll get to that if we have time, because they have a plan for that too. So goal number 2 says we need sustainable agriculture with sustainable food production. And if you know anything about the UN, sustainable doesn't mean what they want us to think it means, right? Goal number 6 says we need sustainable management of water, especially in agriculture. Goal number 12 says we need sustainable consumption and production patterns, again, especially in agriculture. And we need a sustainable management and efficient use of natural resources. Well, who is more sustainable than people who've been farming the land for hundreds of years? Who has a stronger vested interest in keeping the environment and the land good and clean and functioning than the farmers whose families depend on that? I mean, this is so obvious, right? And they like to call this environmentalism. If you want to see what communism and socialism and these ideas do to the environment, You can go to any of the Stan countries, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan. The most polluted, filthy, disgusting countries in the world are the countries where the government determines how we're going to sustainably manage resources and lands and things like that. The cleanest countries in the world are the countries where private property rights are strong and protected. Switzerland, the United States of America, Canada, New Zealand, Japan, etc., etc. Right? These are the countries that actually have clean environments. These are the countries that actually use resources sustainably. So the UN is obviously not interested in a healthy environment or healthy food production or even proper use of resources. Then they'd vote for the free market. Sustainable development in goal number 14, we need to address marine pollution of all kinds, which again, in particular here, from land-based activities, including nutrient pollution. Again, a big target, big bullseye on the backs of farmers. Now, if you read their vision for agriculture, the UN has an agency called the Food and Agriculture Organization, literally run by a member of the Chinese Communist Party, which I should remind you murdered 100 million of its own slaves. Again, what do you think they'll do to you? They tell you what we need to have sustainable agriculture. Massive restrictions on all of the inputs that we need for agriculture. And then we need genetic engineering of everything so that the big companies in bed with the big government can totally dominate the value chain from top to bottom. So as an example of sustainable agriculture, they said we got to get rid of nitrogen fertilizer, which anybody ever met a farmer? Right? It's very, very difficult to produce food without fertilizers. That's why farmers use fertilizers, okay? So they have this three-legged stool that I shared with you a little bit. But I want to go back to the issue of land for a moment, because they've been pretty clear about what they want to do with land, right? At its core, land is the source of almost all of the wealth we think of, right? Every shirt you wear, every product you buy at the store, ultimately it's being created with resources that came out of the land. I don't think I have 30 minutes left. I think I might have 15. If I have 30, that's cool. We can do it. They are very, very clear about what they want to see with land, right? In Habitat 1, this was out of a conference that the UN put together in Vancouver. Their report was called Human Settlement Issues Number 1, Habitat and Land. They said that land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset controlled by individuals. No more private property rights for you, folks. They go on to say that private land ownership is a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, therefore contributes to social injustice. See, private land ownership is bad. It's being used to contribute to social injustice, and we all know how bad that is, so give up your land. Okay? What happens once we don't own any more land? We can't produce our own food, we can't get our own timber, we can't produce our own minerals, we can't get energy. We are completely at the mercy of our overlords. Right? And then they conclude with public control of land use is therefore indispensable. And public control of is basically bureaucratese for government control of. Okay? The government will control the land. And if you want to know how well that worked, go talk to somebody that grew up in the Soviet Union. Go talk to somebody that grew up in Ukraine. Go talk to somebody that grew up in China. Go talk to somebody that grew up in Cambodia. Go talk to somebody that grew up in Cuba. Cuba's literally importing sugar. They were one of the biggest exporters of sugar in the world. Now they're importing sugar. The old Milton Friedman joke, what would happen if communists and socialists ran the Sahara Desert? Well, there'd be a shortage of sand. It's funny, but it's true, right? Communism, socialism, collective ownership of the means of production always produces the same thing. Even if these people were well-intentioned, it would produce the same thing for reasons I described in my lecture either last year or the year before on economics. But this is really bad, folks. This is really, really bad. So we're going to skip some of this because we talked about it a little bit. But they absolutely view food as a weapon in their quest for controlling us. And I know that because they put it on paper. You might remember this guy here, Henry Kissinger. I call him the poodle of the Rockefeller dynasty. He's the guy who recruited Klaus Schwab to do the World Economic Forum thingy. And back when he was serving as National Security Advisor, he wrote a very important memo. This was dated December 10th, 1974. It was called National Security Memo 200. And it was classified for a long time. It's finally been declassified. Go read the memo. It's about using food as a weapon. They say those third world people, they're having too many babies. Those Africans, those Latin Americans, they're having too many babies. Can't have them having all these babies. Right? We know better than they do how many babies they ought to be having. And so we should use food as a weapon to make their governments restrict their populations. We want to have them committing abortions, we want birth controls for everyone, etc., etc. And we're going to use food as leverage to make sure they do what we say in terms of reducing the population. Okay. Read the memo. I mean, it's declassified now. National Security Memo 200. Food will be the weapon we use to force these governments to depopulate their countries. And it was all framed in national security terms. Oh, if those Africans keep having so many babies. Oh, if those Latin Americans keep having so many babies, it's going to be a threat to our national security. Baloney. Right? There's absolutely no threat to our national security by Africans or Asians or Europeans or anybody else having babies. Right? God said babies are a blessing. And they've been caught on this stuff multiple times. I mean, when we have time another time, I'll tell you guys about what they got caught doing in Kenya. The UN Population Fund, that's the UN agency dedicated to reducing the population, they put out a report that said the Kenyan women are having way too many babies. How dare they have 4 children per woman? We need to do something about it. Very next year, the World Health Organization and their buddies in UNICEF come in and they start doing a neonatal tetanus vaccine campaign. Only women and girls of childbearing age are eligible for these life-saving vaccines. And the very clever Kenya Catholic Doctors Association said, this doesn't smell right. So they got samples of these vaccines from all over the country that were being distributed by the UN, funded by Bill Gates of hell, and they sent them to laboratories all over the world to be tested. Every single one was laced with something called beta-HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin, which is a hormone that women's bodies produce and require to be able to carry a pregnancy to term. And so what was happening is they were injecting these girls with tetanus toxoids. Their immune system was treating everything in the vaccine as an invader that needed to be destroyed. And so when they'd get pregnant, their body would say, oh no, there's that terrible hormone. And it would attack the hormone and the women would lose their children and they couldn't have babies. Every single Catholic bishop in Kenya signed a statement saying this was a covert sterilization campaign. It was not a vaccination campaign. So that's how maniacally evil these people that we're dealing with are. Okay, can you imagine being sterilized against your will by a bunch of kooks who think they know better than you do how many children you ought to have? Frankly, these people all ought to be hauled off to jail if we're feeling generous. So the Rockefeller Foundation, they've got a big plan. You can find it on their website, Transforming Food Systems, which means we will control your food systems. It's a World Economic Forum. They're working on the food innovation hubs. We're going to transform the future of food. The Bezos Earth Fund, this is Jeff Bezos, the little fascist that runs Amazon. He's got the Future of Food program through the Bezos Earth Fund. Why are all these billionaires so interested in this? Because they think there's too many of us. And they want to control it all. Right? Here's Bill Gates of hell talking about those terrible moo-moo cows.
One crucial part is agriculture, and one thing you said you were particularly surprised by was how great a problem bovine flatulence is. Can you explain what that is and why it's a problem?
Yeah, so the animals that can eat grass have very unusual stomachs that have these bacteria that are methanogenic in there, and so they leak natural gas, both out the front and the back. And so people have said...
Whenever you feel stupid, just remember there are people who take this guy seriously, okay? Could always be worse. All right. So, all right, we can't have cows, we can't have fish, we can't have regular crops. What do we do? Well, they have an answer for that. Now, I actually became aware of this in 2013. I've got a lot of sources in the United Abominations. It turns out there's a lot of people who think like we do in there and don't like what they're doing, but they like their pensions and they don't want to lose their jobs. So they just quietly feed me information. I could count on literally one hand the number of journalists who report critically on the UN. And so in 2013, this Food and Agriculture Organization put out a report called Edible Insects, Future Prospects for Food and Feed Security. And one of my contacts in Rome who works at this agency sent me this report and said, Alex, you need to look at this. It's an obscure little report nobody's talking about now, but this is going to be very, very big. Mark my words, in 5 to 10 years, everybody's going to be talking about it. We've got to eat bugs, because bugs are sustainable. Cows are not sustainable. Corn is not sustainable. Fish are not sustainable. Chickens are not sustainable. Bugs are sustainable. And if you read this, I did this article about it. It's in 2013. UN let them eat bugs. And people say, oh, that's ridiculous, Alex. They're never going to do that. I mean, come on. How gullible do you think we are? Well, one of the main things it says in this report is we got to brainwash the kids to believe that eating bugs is good. And we got to get the news media and the influencers and the celebrities to tell everybody how great it is going to be to eat bugs. And presto, here we go. yummy. They're rich in protein. And they're healthy. And they can be farmed at scale with minimal footprint. Oh boy, isn't that great. You're gonna save the planet by eating cockroaches. Okay, yummy. I wish this was a joke, folks, but they are dead serious. They plan on you, if you survive, they plan on having you eat bugs if they get their way, okay? Here's our taxpayer-funded propaganda outlet.
Revolutionized by science.
Ooh, science.
As new research
Trust the
helps bring
science.
unexpected ingredients to the table.
Kind of tastes like shrimp. They have this seafood quality to them.
It reminds you of like a Frito or a chip.
Just like crunchy and a little oily and a little salty, and they taste like popcorn.
And I can show you endless examples of this stuff, folks. It's all over Europe. It's all in our schools now, right? Even in Florida, a fifth grade parent of a fifth grader sent me these reports. This was in Tampa area, teaching kids that bugs are the food of the future and they're so sustainable. And look at the CO2 emissions of cows and chickens versus bugs. It's just minimal, right? Isn't that great? Now, the government knows what happens when you eat bugs. 2017, they funded a study that found that the chitin in bugs provokes human immunity to generate a deluge of inflammatory cytokines which injure organs, leading to asthma, atopic dermatitis, and in persistent situations leads to death, multiple sclerosis, systemic lupus, erythromatosis, and cancer. Oh, yummy, right? Then they did a 2019 study that found that lots of these so-called edible bugs are filled with parasites that are unbelievably dangerous to humans and animals. So yeah, eat up, right? Now, by the time this is all done, if they get their way, they want to genetically engineer every last organism that you eat. You know why? They figured out that owning the intellectual property is the biggest way to get your money, right? If they can genetically engineer the seeds and the critters that you are eating and they can own that intellectual property, they own the entire food supply. They will be monopolists over the food and you will pay whatever they say. And they brag about it, right? Bill Gates of Hell did this article in 2018, Gene Editing for Good, says we're going to use this gene editing not just for our crops and our animals, which we're doing already, but even for our babies. Okay, here's Bill Gates of Hell again on the population issue.
First, we've got population. Now, the world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
Never trust a guy with your health care or your food supply when he publicly says there are too many of us and we need to reduce that by 10 to 15%. We're going to use vaccines and reproductive health care, which is abortions, to reduce that population, okay? And here's the kind of stuff that they're doing already with these gene editing technologies. They're hacking the software of life. This is the chief of science at Moderna.
As I've trained as a physician scientist, we've been living this phenomenal digital and scientific revolution. And I'm here today to tell you that we're actually hacking the software of life and that it's changing the way we think about prevention and treatment of disease. So here's all the biology you need to know in 30 seconds. Our body is made out of organs. Our organs are made out of cells. And in every cell, there's this thing called messenger RNA, or mRNA for short, that transmits the critical information from the DNA, our genes, to the protein, which is really the stuff we're all made out of. This is the critical information that determines what a cell will actually do. And so we think of it like an operating system. And it's not just in every cell of our body, it's actually in every cell of every organism alive. It's the same.
It's the same thing, folks. They are going to, and they're working on this right now. They've got the Convention on Biological Diversity. They want you to think it's about like saving some random species in the Amazon. Nope, nope. If you read it, it's about gathering the genetic material from every organism on the planet, putting it in a DNA bank, licensing out this DNA to biopharmaceutical companies and governments to literally manufacture organisms on demand. It's crazy, and they will own and totally control the food supply if they're left to their own devices. So we're just going to go right to the end now because we are almost out of time, I think. Right? Am I right? Ms. Jimenez? Okay, yeah. So what do? Well, we got to expose these evildoers. We got to get involved in the political process. We got to prepare ourselves. I'm building a farm right now, and I don't say everybody needs to build a farm, but if you're not going to build a farm, I would at least be friends with a farmer. Can't hurt as they're trying to starve us to have friends who can help you produce food. Always good to have multiple income streams. Make sure you've got a solid community where you live, whether that be a church community, a homeschool community, a preparedness community. Turn off your TV, get good information. The Constitution can be a bulwark against these megalomaniacs and their plans here in the United States if we can get it enforced, which that's going to take a lot of work. Ultimately, we need to learn how to say no.
Amen.
Right, when the next Democrat deep state president comes along and says, hey, we're going to shut down your farms, we're going to shut down your power plants, we're going to shut down your mines, we're going to shut down your timber operations, the response from our governors and our county sheriffs and our state legislatures needs to be 2 letters. No, we're not doing it. And amen. Right? And I'll just end with this. You know, our forefathers, they begged the government, they begged the king, they begged the parliament, please stop oppressing us, please, please, please. And they got nothing but laughed at and more tyranny in response. And so finally they went to a higher court. And we who are in Christ, we also have access to that higher court. They flew this flag, appeal to heaven. I think that's where we're at, folks. It's like the emergency button when you're all out of options. Appeal to heaven. Now would be a good time. Thanks, guys. God bless you.